Hello and welcome to the Jessie James Beads Facebook page. I hope you're having a beautiful day no matter what it is you're doing. Good morning, good noon, good afternoon and good evening. Let me know what you've been up to today and how things are with you. For today's free tutorial here on Facebook for Jessie James Beads, we're going to be working with one of the sweater weather bead mixes, and we have chosen La Luna. And I'm going to show you some of those beads in a minute just because they are absolutely astonishingly beautiful. They are glorious. It's noon here in Buffalo, says Sharon. Hi, Jem, says Susan. I believe Susan's in Cali. Zoe, hello to you, my darling girl also. And Sharon is in, which is a good evening. Thank you so much. I hope that you're having a beautiful time no matter what it is you've been doing. Should we have a quick sneaky peek at the beads that we're going to look at today? So it is from the Sweater Weather bead collections, and we have got the bead mix in La Luna. This is the piece that we're going to work on together today, which isn't tricky. Maybe a little bit fiddly to get started, but not tricky at all. So we're going to have a look at that in a little while. But to begin with, I want to show you around the bead mix. So you have got a gorgeous, gorgeous collection of beads here. If I tip them all out, I'm pretty sure some of them will end up going off into infinity. But never mind at all. Let's hope that all things end well in beads and tables. So you've got some glorious floral inspired drop tassel type beads with really useful loops on them. We've got crystals galore in here. Now, I particularly love a half coat crystal because you get a super duper disco effect. Hello from Aurora. Hello to you, so I hope you're all right. And Stacey is in. Hello. Hope is in. Hello to you, my darlings. One thing I love about the effect you get with a half coat is that you have a clear side and you have a coated side, hence the half coat name. I love this bead set, says Zoe, just the box doesn't close. Yeah, absolutely, because there are so many in there and they're packed by skilled little bead elves. I don't know how they all get in there either. But whichever way you look at this bead, it's extraordinary. If you catch it on its side, it's got the most beautiful effect. If you catch the fully coated side, it's glorious, metallic and beautiful. And then if you see it on the uncoated side with that coat behind it, the light play that you get is absolutely insurpassable. Really, really beautiful. Sue is in from Ohio. Charlene is there. Sharon says fabulous colourway for a cold January. Yep, absolutely. What can I say? There are so many things in here. I also love when we have crystal beads that have a matte and a polished effect to them. Something completely different from the half coat. We've also got these aurora-like gems, not gems, I'm so sorry, beads. I don't know what this effect is called, but I think of it as an aurora. They are absolutely exquisite, really beautiful. You've got big square crystals, you've got funky shaped crystals, you've even got a couple of cages in there. We've got rhinestones with large holes in the centre in a couple of different colourways. These, I think, are one of my favourite bead spacers that I've ever seen. Hello to Prudence in North Carolina. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. So these light sky blue colour little rhinestones in a dimpled metallic spacer bead. Absolutely love these. I could 100% work with a strand of nothing but those. They're glorious. You've also got moondrops, which are very, very cute indeed. Pair of earrings without any effort whatsoever. I think that's called the cat's eye effect, says Sharon. I love the bead elves. Well, I can only suggest that that is what they must be, for their talent in bead packing is unsurpassable. We've also got connectors with La Luna. Absolutely gorgeous. Really, really nice dome to them as well. Very, very simple in the centre of some chain. You've got spacers. You have got simple drop charms as well. You've got the open heart, like so. You've got an enclosed, almost like a caged, it's not a heart at all, it's a star. I don't know what I'm talking about. You've also got the solid star drop charm, which wanted to go for a bit of a journey. These are absolutely magnificent as well. Giant step cut cubes. They're beautiful. And not to not mention these, but I adore these little saucer shaped, almost like a bronze colour. Absolutely gorgeous, every single one. You've got this, which is not dissimilar in colour to a sky blue topaz. You've also got half coated in an effect which I've not seen before. So you've got almost like a beautiful glowing blue, almost like a chalcedony blue on one side, to a metallic sheen on the other side with hints of pink in there. Really, really clever. It's a balmy 50 degrees F in Tampa. Never been to Tampa. Must go at some point. I'm just going to pull some of those beads out because we might use them in a little while. You've also got these very, very cool, funny shaped ones. I don't know what the name of that shape is. They're kind of triangular, but not. Very, very cool. And these are utterly magnificent crystal beads with the most beautiful cut work on them. And a gorgeous, gorgeous... It's somewhere between a sky blue and a London blue topaz colourway. But you'll see that where it's narrower towards the edges, you get an effect of the blue being less deep. I think it's really clever. Really, really love this collection. Absolutely beautiful. And then there's another one of those Aurora-y ones. So let's pop these back out of the way and take another quick look at what we're going to make together today. Let's have a gandaroo. And there we go. Let's pop the bead box out of the way. Probably knock that over later, but you know, we can all laugh at me in a little while, can't we? So that's what we're going to look at creating together today, and it's absolutely perfect in this collection. Now, the effect of the beads going around the edge, I've chosen, which I didn't have any left in the box because I used them all. Well, I've got a couple actually in my little bead drawer just here. But they're almost like a bicone shaped brass colourway, but they're quite fancy spacers. It is a beautiful collection. Whichever bead you pick out first. That's from Sweater Weather and it's called La Luna, which is gorgeous. Now, in terms of our wires today, whoops-a-daisy, I knew something would go flying at some point very, very soon. Let's just drop that in the top corner there. I'm going to be working with around about 18 inches of round wire in an 18 gauge. So that's approximately equivalent in the UK to 1mm across. So I'm just giving that a little bit of a warm while it's in my hand to make sure that central section is nice and smooth and fluid. Hello all to Nikki. How are you? I hope you're having a beautiful day. For the ease of you seeing what's happening, I've got a different colour. I've got a copper wire here, and now I'm going to be working in a 24 gauge, which is one of those funny gauges we don't see a lot of over here in Blighty, where it is a bit chilly today, if I'm honest. You could equally use a 26 gauge, or you could size that up to a 22 gauge. I used a 22 gauge on the piece that I'm going to show you here, and hopefully you'll be able to detect the difference as we start making together. It's slightly easier to work with the 24 gauge. It is possible with a 22, but you could size it down if you wanted to a 26 gauge, which is super fluid and easy to work with. So let's have another look at some of the beads that we're going to be using today. So this is equivalent to a step cut. If you can see, if I move that, you can see that there's steps that move over the surface of it, but it's also a twisted step cut because the steps go diagonally across that shape. So it's very, very cool indeed. You've also got some little kite facets on either side and a super, super drill hole down that centre. It's an absolutely gorgeous colour, very, very close to a London blue, but also because you're working with it like a crystal glass, I suppose this is. I'm not 100% sure. I don't make the beads. I just work with them, so I couldn't tell you exactly what it is, but it feels that way. It does have a little hint of an Aurora Borealis coating. You'll see occasional flashes of a little bit of a different colour. Nikki says, great, I'm beading, so always great to hear. Lovely to have your company, sweetheart. Hello from Phoenix in Arizona, says Jeanette. How are you today? I hope you're having a beautiful day, sweetheart. So we've got our diagonally step cut, majorly large faceted bead to work with as our focal for the day. Now, if we haven't met before, my name is Jem, I'm from the UK, and I'm here with you on Jessie James Beads today to show you a little bit more about wire work. When I teach wire work, no matter who I'm teaching to, whether it's in person, on YouTube, here at Jessie James, or wherever I find myself, I always try to make the tutorials as accessible to people that haven't perhaps worked with wire an awful lot and they just fancy having a bit of a go. So if you've not worked with wire, I'm only going to be using 3 tools today. I've got some flush cutters, which are ancient and dirty. I've got some round nose pliers, super affordable. I've also got some bent chain nose pliers. Now, really any flat nose pliers that taper at the tip are absolutely fine. I prefer to use my bent chain nose because it means I can show you underneath as I'm working, and hopefully you'll be able to see just a little bit more easily. But straight chain nose pliers or any flat nose pliers with a decent taper to them will also work. So that's 3 tools. To make the bail, you could use, for instance, a marker pen. You could use just a round form. If you have a bail maker, fantastic. If you don't, then a pencil or something similar will be adequate. You don't need a huge amount of tools to get going with this project. You do need, though, the La Luna bead mix. So let's get cracking, shall we? So I've got a couple of lengths of wire here. They're both round wire. They're both approximately 18 inches in length. The reason I'm using 18 inches is just to make things as easy as possible. So if I pop the finer wire, and again that's the 24 gauge up out of the way, well, nearly out of the way. Let's try that again, shall we? It's trying to stay on screen. I'm going to start by working with my 18 gauge round wire. So what we need to do to begin with is to create a form that is larger than our focal bead. Now, if you wanted to set the bead sideways in landscape mode, as it were, rather than portrait mode, you absolutely can. Doesn't really matter which way you want to do it. I'm going to set that in the portrait mode because I think it's quite elegant. I think it's a lovely shape. It's quite reminiscent of Victorian jewellery as well. Are they soft or hard wire? They would both work. My silver colour wire is actually quite hard temper. My finer gauge, which is the 24, is a soft wire. So I'm using a combination, and that is partly because it's what I had available, but it's also because you can use either with this project. It won't make any difference to your finished project. It might be slightly more tricky on your fingers to work with a hard wire, but a dead soft on an 18 gauge might not be quite the right wire to work with, bearing in mind we're looking to create a coiled bail up at the top. So that would go on your threading material or a chain or ribbon or whatever it is you're going to hang that from later. So a dead soft wire, probably no go. But a half hard or something along those lines would be fine. The wire I'm working with here, the 18 gauge silver colour, is a hard wire. So let's pop that piece up at the top for now. Let's get those beads over in the corner and let's see what I can drop on the floor first, shall we? So again, 18 inches, 18 gauge, easy to remember. I'm going to be working with my bent chain nose pliers to begin with, and I'm going to warm through that wire in the centre there to make sure it's nice and soft and fluid and smooth. The first thing that I want to do is to create a line that will sit underneath the very bottom of our chosen focal La Luna bead. So this needs to be in approximately the middle of your wire. And what I'm going to do is put those pliers on to begin with. I'm going to turn up at a very strong angle to begin with, and then I'm going to draw that back to around about 45 degrees. And all I'm going to do is trace around my bead. It needs to be larger than the bead so that there's space to move and space to add wires as we go. So what I'm going to do is pop the pliers underneath like so. And I'm just going to offer that bead up to see where I need to put the next bend in position. So if I bring that over just a little bit further, and again I'm going to take that up to the 45 degree mark, it's caught on my camera, before coming back out, I beg pardon, up to the 90 degree or right angle bend before coming back to that 45 degree bend. I'm just going to try and keep that straight. I just managed to catch the microphone stand actually. So what we're looking to have is a straight line down at the bottom, which is obviously not very straight at the moment. There we go, that's a little bit better. With some right angle bends either side. Now my angles are a little bit too narrow right now, so I'm going to support that straight line down at the bottom and just open these out, just tease the wire apart very, very gently. And as I said, what we're looking to do is to trace a shape around the outside of that bead. I was thinking the bead in your design give a very beautiful Art Deco look. I love the Art Deco and the Art Nouveau movements in both jewellery and classical design. And yes, I'm aware that literally everyone else on the planet calls it Art Deco. I'm unusual like that. I can only apologise. But yes, I do love working with Art Deco designs and styles, and it is a huge influence in jewellery making. So you can see that I haven't managed to trace that very well just yet, so all I will do is just open that out until I'm happy with the frame that we're creating, and you can see that is a space away. Now, 18 gauge wire, for your reference, if you're not familiar with using millimetres, 18 gauge wire is 1 millimetre from side to side. So if I say to you that I want to see a gap of 1 millimetre between the outside of the bead and the wire, just imagine it's like you've got space for another one of those pieces of wire to sit between. So it's actually quite useful to be able to say, have space for another strip of 18 gauge wire in between the bead and our frame wire. So I just need to put my finer gauge wire out of the way because it's trying to get in on the action. The next thing that we need to do is to create uprights on both sides of that bead, and it will be easier for me if I just turn this on its side for a moment, because I can get my pliers underneath, bring that into position, and then again I'm going to take that wire much further than I need to before bringing it back to what will essentially be an upright when the bead is in the correct orientation. So you can see we're starting to build a frame into which we will later add this bead. So I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Now you can do this again by putting those pliers into position, or I'm going to go by eye and use my first measurement as a guide. So if I take that angle further than I need to, the reason I take the wire further than I want to is because it gives a slightly sharper bend at that angle, and we want it to be quite angular. We don't want it to be soft for this design. In other designs we're going to have nice soft flowing smooth swooshes of wire, but for this design I actually love those angles. And again, Sharon is absolutely correct in saying that Art Deco relies on angles and geometry, so if you wanted to reflect that Art Deco nature, then you absolutely do need to focus on those angles. So you can open and close that just a couple of times if you need to. I wouldn't go crazy, wouldn't go like hundreds and hundreds of times, but what I'm trying to do here is to keep the design flat. And the idea here is that you design as if you're working between two panes of glass, so it's nice and flat. We're currently working in just those two dimensions, so every bend that we're creating is on the same plane as that desk is. So let's pop the wire around our bead and see how we're getting on. It's reasonably close. What we definitely don't want is for that to be too tight. If you do need to make minor adjustments, having warmed your wire before you start working means that you will probably get away with it. So for the bend that comes back in at the top of the shoulders, you do need to be aware that it's very easy to make it too small at this stage. So I'm going to pop those pliers underneath and just hold the bead over the, or next to it, or over the top, whatever is easiest for you, bearing in mind I'm trying to show it to you rather than show it to my face, which is where it probably needs to be. So I'm just going to probably take those pliers a little bit further along, drop the bead back out, and again I'm going to bring that wire hard across the top. Now when you're trying to make sides that are exactly the same, here's a little cheeky trick for you. Let's say that we've made sure that the lower side of our frame is exactly how we want it to be, and let's say that we have created a perfect right angle between these two wires. If you want the other side to match perfectly, you can pop that bend in at the same time so that those wires stack one on top of the other. And I'll just hold that with my hands out of the way for a second so you can see they match up. Or if you preferred, you could get a tape measure or a ruler to measure this section of the design. Hello to you, Maria, welcome. So if I turn this back into its correct orientation, I'm just going to open that up slightly so you can see what's happening. I'm going to support the straight line which reflects the side of that bead, and just open this back up to approximately that 45 degrees. So I do need to check that everything is going to fit inside. That's probably just a little bit small. So what I'm going to do is just pop my pliers in that joint and move it slightly northwards. Because we warmed that wire first, even though we're working with a hard wire, it is an achievable function of warming that wire first. That fits much better. So on the second side, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to move the bend up slightly by just gently opening and closing those pliers very, very softly, just to nibble up the side of the wire before recreating that bend and then drawing it back up at 45 degrees. So constantly putting our focal bead in, that twisted step cut crystal. And honestly, that looks about as good as I could hope to get on a live. So the next thing we need to do is to create a bend up at the top of the shoulders. So we've already done this bend, and this bend. So we now need to create a very fine little bend just here up at the top. So it needs to be the same size as the one that you created right down at the bottom, either side of that straight line. And if that's twisting at all, we can just give that a little bit of a flatten. Won't hurt to give it some work hardening while we're at it. You can reflect this size up at the top. So if you're really happy with that size that you've created down at the bottom, you could use a ruler and recreate that again. What I'm going to do is just kind of go by eye for a second. Hold that down over the bead. That looks reasonably accurate. Could have done with being just a little bit longer, I think. And the angle isn't quite right. So another thing that you can do to make your life easier is flip it over so that you're working with your dominant hand. For me to do this on the left side is actually quite tricky. I'm very right dominant. So I'm just going to bring that angle up until it looks fairly square. And I'm going to use that sideways line as a guide for my next angle to take place. So if I just turn this onto its side for a second, we need to make sure we've got space to drop that frame over the bead. It's reasonably good facsimile of the shape of the bead, plus that extra little bit of air space we want around the outside. Hello Tasha, welcome. So the next thing that we need to do is to take these elongated ends, and we are working with a lot of wire. 18 inches of that 18 gauge wire to begin with is excessive for a reasonable sized pendant, and I will show you why that is in a little while. What we're going to do now, if I just open this up slightly, is where we have these long wires coming across the centre, I need to turn these up after a very small amount of space has elapsed. So what I'm going to do is pop my pliers in at the top of that angle on the left side. If I hold that over the stone, you should be able to see that. And I need to turn the wire up. I'll get my hand in the way just for the first one to show you that that's going to sit up at the 12 o'clock. If you imagine this is a clock face, we've got 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock. This is our 12 o'clock position. So where we just created that last angle that sits up at the top of that crystal, I'm going to do the same thing on the second side. I'm going to pop my pliers underneath. What I can do is just open that out a second so it's easier for you to see, and push this up so that that also sits up at the 12 o'clock position. And then I'm just going to draw those back in together. What I'm doing here is I'm just very, very gently running my hands, thumb and finger, along those wires to open them up slightly, because it's easier for me to then hold and check to see if the crystal will fit in the frame, and it will. So there's around about 1 millimetre gap between the outside edges of that crystal and the inside edges of our wire frame. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what a millimetre looks like, we're working with 18 gauge wire. 18 gauge wire is 1 millimetre across. It's exactly the same dimension. So it's like having a spare piece of wire between the crystal and that framework. What we're going to do now is put the crystal out of the picture for a little while, because we're going to add on these beads around the outside. So for my initial piece here, which I've done again in both silver and copper wire to make it easier for you to see, I've added these almost bicone-esque or double trumpet little spacers in the bronzy, brassy colour. They're quite decorative actually, they're really pretty. And then I've added the Aurora looking round beads. I think they're 4mm size. They're very pretty. Whatever bead you choose to use, and in the bead mix we've got some of the faux pearl effect in that beautiful turquoise colour. We've got this much more pale, almost an Amazonite colour faceted rondelle in an opaque material. Jessica says, I love watching you. You show and explain. You make it easy to follow what you're doing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the feedback. I like to teach as if nobody's ever touched wire before, in the hopes that it will then be easy for everybody if they want to have a go, to get involved. Get yourself a La Luna, which is the bead mix we're working with, which is from the Sweater Weather bead collection. This is La Luna. If you missed at the very beginning of today's live, we did a rundown on all the gorgeous beads that you get in the mix. This is what's left over after making one of these and a second piece for our demonstration today, and I can still barely close the lid. So one thing I adore about these bead mixes, bead collections, is that you do get a whole load of beads to play with and be inspired by. So what I have done on the demonstration piece is interspersed, that's the wrong word. I have alternated, that's a much better word, between those bicone brassy toned or bronzy toned spacers and the AB looking round beads. As I say, you've got lots of options. If you've got enough and they're a repeatable size, that's what I would look to use. Now I have used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 beads in total. I'm not going to show you over and over how to add them on around the frame wire because it gets a little bit old after a while. I'm going to show you how to start that off now. So let's pop the beads and the demonstration piece up here. We need our frame that we've created together, and you do need to be reasonably happy at this stage that that is all straight lines and good angles, and also that it is flat, but most especially that you can fit your focal bead inside that frame. Now if it's a bit tight at the top end, don't worry, because that can open out slightly to accommodate if necessary. So as long as you've got decent sizes on those angles, all is good. One thing that I would say is it's worth getting just this first little bit up at the 12 o'clock position, having those be reasonably straight just while you're doing the next part of the tutorial. Just means that when you have set all of your beads around the outside of your framework, it will be easier to start weaving up at the top if everything is good and straight. So bead out of the way. Let's start now with 18 inches of our 24 gauge wire. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you could use 22, you could use 26 gauge. 26 gauge is really handy if you are brand new to wire and you might find the moving of it in finer details a little bit tricky. Go for the 26 gauge instead. It will work just as well. What we're going to do to begin with is just very, very gently open out our frame without destroying any of those angles. We're just very carefully giving ourselves a little bit of space. What I'm going to do is take one end of my finer gauge wire, and again this is approximately 18 inches. I'm working in soft raw copper 24 gauge. I'm going to lay around about an inch over the top, and what I want to do is to wind that 3 times around the shoulder of our design. So I am going to give that a very quick work harden. All I'm doing here is opening and closing flat pliers on that wire. I'm not absolutely crushing it, I'm just opening and closing a couple of times, and that means that we get a nice firm piece of wire to weave onto. So as I say, I've laid around about an inch of the finer gauge wire over the top. What I need to do is wrap that 3 times just up here. Now it's quite tricky to show you. Let's see if I can get the best possible light. Here we go, that looks good. So I'm going to take that tail all the way around, and I'm looking for 3 wraps. You could use slightly less than 1 inch if you were being completely thrifty. But the reason I start with 1 inch is it means it's just a little bit easier to get those 3 wraps. Good morning, Patty. How are you today? So once I've got my 3 wraps around, what I might do is just bring that up slightly. It's blurry, but you should be able to see that I've got 3 wraps of wire around the shoulder of the design. I'm just going to squish that very, very gently to make it nice and neat and tidy before I flip that over, and I'm just going to cut off the short tail. Very, very carefully. The best thing I can ever advise you about with wire work is look twice before you cut the wire. There is nothing worse than cutting the wrong wire and having to start again. So I looked twice before I used my flush cutters just to trim that very, very last little bit away. The second best bit of advice I can give you is to have a little pot into which to put your wire ends. And make sure that you either recycle those or dispose of them carefully, because they're super pointy and they are not fun if you stand on them. Hi Jem, love watching your videos. You always explain so well, love. Thank you so much, Debbie and Howard. That's really kind of you. So what I'm going to do is make sure that those 3 wraps are very, very neat and tidy by just very carefully and very gently popping my pliers over those to make a really neat coil. I'm going to turn it back up into the correct orientation now and just pop that down for a hot second. So I've got the tail of the wire over to one side, and I'm going to start by just recapping what we've got so far, which is 3 coils of wire. The finer gauge wire is attached to my frame up on the top corner. I work on the right hand side first because I'm right dominant. You can just as easy start on the left and work around it anti-clockwise or go clockwise. It doesn't really matter one little bit. So what I have done is I've alternated on the design that I prepared a couple of days ago. I've alternated between 2 types of beads, and I've used 12 in total. If they're about 4mm, that will be plenty. You could use slightly fewer or slightly more if you want to. It depends how close you want them to sit together. So if I pop that back up here for now, I'm going to grab one of those Amazonite colour rondelles. I'm just going to try and support the frame and keep it still while I find the end of my finer gauge wire and add my first bead on. It can zip line down into position. Sharon says, love this idea, might give it a go later myself. I hope that you do, and I also hope that you manage to snaffle a La Luna collection, because it's just perfection with this focal bead, and all of the beads that come in the blend are so complementary colour wise. So I have got my finer gauge wire coming over the top of the frame. I've added my first bead. What I need to do now is just pinch that bead so that it's pushed against the frame. Now, I'm not being heavy-handed. All beads deserve careful treatment. Glass beads and gemstone beads alike, if you are harsh with them, they don't like it. So what I'm going to do is draw that tail of wire, and I'm going to bring it down the back of the frame and then push all the way through the centre of the frame like so. And I'm going to just draw that through now, because that's the easiest way that I think it can possibly happen. If I turn this back to flat, you'll see that the tail of wire has come up through the middle of our frame, and we're now going to repeat that first 3 wraps that we did. So again, I'm going to support the bead. I'm making sure that it doesn't move away from the frame wire, but I'm not crushing it. I'm going to do the same manoeuvre now. If I turn that on its side, push the leading edge of that finer gauge wire through the gap and then draw it through with my forefinger. That's a second wrap, so we've got 1 wrap where it came through the bead, a second wrap. So I'm going to just repeat a 3rd time now, draw the wire through and pull that wire so that it sits over the top of the frame, moving in an outward direction. So if I bring that up slightly closer, you'll be able to see what we've achieved so far, which is 3 wraps, wire over the top through a bead, wire underneath and up through the centre, 3 more wraps. So now I'm going to add on a second bead, and what you'll notice at this stage, you can move that around a bit. So if you want to bring it down, you can. If you want to push that back up to where the neck is, you can. I'm going to now grab another type of bead, and I think I'm going to go for one of the faux pearls. or a pearl-esque bead. This is a round bead in a glorious turquoise colour from this collection, the La Luna collection from Sweater Weather. So I'm just going to support the frame. I'm also going to find the end of the finer gauge wire and add the bead on the end there. Whoosh, that's going to zip line down into position. Now, if you're going to use this collection, then space-wise, you've got your main focal, which is a twisted step cut. That goes in the centre. And because these are, I think, about 3.5 and 4 millimetres in size, I don't know what that equates to in inches, I'm afraid, we're going to use 12 beads, which means that my second bead sits just on the corner, that first angle. So if I draw that back all the way down, let's just slide that up out of the way for a second. Again, what I'm going to do now is support that bead. I need it to not move from its position, but I don't want to hurt it. So I'm carefully holding the frame wire in my non-dominant hand and the bead. If I turn it on its side, you can see that I'm going to push the leading edge of the wire up through the centre of that frame. You can push it all the way if it's easier for you. This again is a soft wire, so it's easy to work with. Pull that all the way around. Now I'm putting just the tiniest bit of tension here. Part of that is because I do have a soft wire to work with, so that's nice and easy. If you're working with a hard wire, just make sure that you don't pull your frame out of shape. Support the bead, and then we're going to wrap once, up through the centre, twice, up through the centre, and a third time so that the wire is again disappearing over the top of the frame and off outwards into infinity. So that is our second bead set into position. So if you wanted to alternate, you absolutely could. If you wanted to add a third bead in or a different bead, the choice is yours. There's so many beads to work with in a bead box like this one that you can absolutely just go for your life. Now, what I think I might do is just go through the process of adding a few more beads until we get down to the 6 o'clock position. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them whilst I just run through this next part of the tutorial without chatting too much, because I'm just repeating. So it's 3 wraps, hold the bead against the frame, leading edge pushes through, and then we're going to go for 1, whoops, there go my pliers, 2, and a third wrap. If your coils go awry, you can just tighten them slightly with the tip of your pliers. So I'm going to now add in another one of those blue pearl effect beads and allow that to slide down into position. Off you come. Come on, come on. There it is. So I'm going to sit that one centrally, like so. It's actually quite nice because the beads on the first one that I made a couple of days ago, they're quite similar in size, whereas obviously because you're working with a rondelle shape and a round shape, even though the beads are both considered to be 4 millimeters or so, they're narrower obviously when you don't have the round shape, so it's going to go in and out, it's going to undulate around the edge, which is quite charming. So I'm going to continue along until we get to the bottom. So push the bead into position, give that a bit of support, and I'm going to run 3 times around the frame. So that's 1, that's 2, and that is 3. I'm going to make sure that my bead still fits and that I haven't squished the frame out of position at all. That's all looking quite good. So I'm going to add now, I think, a different bead just down at the bottom. So let's add in one of those round Aurora effect beads and draw that down. So you can see what we need to do if we're going to stick with 6 beads on this design is we need to make sure that we're starting to come down the last angle before we bring the beads to the corner. The 6th bead needs to be on this bottom corner, and I'll show you for why in just a second. So again, leading edge comes up through the centre of that design. And then we wrap 3 times around. That's 1, that's 2, and that is 3. I'm going to just tighten those coils up neatly before bringing in bead number 6. So let's have a look. I think I've got a spare one of these bronze colour bicone type beads. Give you a slightly closer look at those. They're really pretty. Almost, it's not a Greek effect, but it reminds me of a Greek urn design. So I'm going to bring that final bead for this side down into position. The bicones do work really well because the side of them just sits against the frame really beautifully. So what I'm going to do, when I get to the centre bottom of the design, and it's upside down right now, I'm just going to wrap one time. So push the leading edge through, draw that across the centre. So if I just hold this in position for a second, what I would then do is continue along, repeating in reverse, as it were, doing a mirror image. So I'd have one of these beads, and then I'd go for one of those, and then I would have the alternating between the pearl type bead and the rondelle in the Amazonite colourway. What I'm going to do is just call a halt to it there, because all you're going to do is repeat the exact same steps. Now the reason that I only go for one coil down at the bottom should become apparent. What I might do then is just add one more of those bronzy coloured beads so that you can see what happens down at the very bottom. 4mm is apparently 5 over 32 inches. Wow. Okay. So we were looking for a millimetre gap between the outside of the step faceted twisty bead. So what that equates to in a singular, I really don't know. So I'm just going to hold the second of those bronzy colour beads into position and make sure that it sits on the same position. Like so. So they're sat twinned down at the base. I'm just going to pinch those two beads into position before wrapping 3 times around that frame wire. So that's once, that's twice. If you can hear the wire clattering on the desk, I'm afraid there's very little I can do about that. A 3rd wrap. So you just continue with the same type of beads going up around. If you want to go for random, you go for random. You do you. You know how you want to create jewellery. Let nobody tell you how to do it. Just be inspired and go your own way, perhaps. So continue all the way around. When you get to the top, wrap 3 times and then very carefully take your flush cutters and trim away any excess that you may have. You shouldn't be left with too much. If you're copying this exact design, 18 inches is enough to just go around with a little bit of spare just to make sure. So you continue along in that same way. Add the second half of your beads around the edge. I'm just going to have a very quick mouthful of water, excuse me. And there we go, and a good morning to Robin Rose. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is find some more of our finer gauge wire. As I mentioned earlier, I'm using 24 gauge. And I'm going to thread off around about, probably again, 18 inches. And I'm just going to take that from the spool now. And what we're going to do is just to lay our wire over the top of the design for a second. Like so. And what we're going to do is set our main focal bead in position across the centre here. Now there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. The easiest way I have found is to start at the top. So we need to make sure that we've got at least 1.5 inches over the end of the frame wire. What we're going to do is add the bead in a second, using this wire we're about to add on. So you need at least 1.5 inches here, overhanging the base of the design to make your life easy. If you try and skimp and only give yourself 1/2 inch, it becomes tricky. And we want this to be accessible and easy. So I'm just going to make sure 1.5 inches past the end, and just hold that in position for a moment before I wrap 3 times around one of our uprights at that 12 o'clock position. So I'm pinching firmly, and I'm going to wrap 3 times around one of these upright wires. So that's 1, catching the pliers, because why wouldn't I? 2, and then a 3rd time around this side. So wrapping 3 times around there, and then I'm going to push that really tightly into position. And then I'm going to leave a gap between our 2 uprights at the top of the pendant design. Little bit of a gap. The finer gauge wire has come over the top and then underneath. So because it's coming underneath on this wire, it needs to go over the top on the other side. We're going to do a little light basket weaving. So I'm leaving a gap. I'm going to now wrap 3 times around. You've got an upper wire visually looking at it as you are now, and a lower wire. So 3 times around either of those before returning to the other side. Now a basket weave means that when you draw the wire from one side to the other, you're switching. So from underneath here, that means we need to go over the top here. So I'm just going to push that down slightly, draw the wire over the top and all the way around. Now you could push the leading edge up through if it's easier for you. Little handy hint here, if you apply some heat and warmth to that wire, it will open out really nicely for you. So pinching very, very firmly, I'm going to wrap 3 times around the upper of our 2 wires for now. As they are visually, you have an upper and a lower. Underneath this side, so over the top this side, and then another 3 wraps. Now if you continue until you've gotten rid of all of that wire, what will happen is you'll have a nice decorative section over the top front of your pendant bail, and that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to fill at least an inch and a quarter, maybe, depending on how tightly you weave. We're going to fill that section with basket weave. Let me pop that back down for a second. I'm not going to continue doing that for too much longer because it's very boring for you to watch. What you do need to keep an eye on is that these 2 upright wires stay approximately the same distance apart. You're doing 3 wraps on one side before switching to the other side and doing another 3 wraps. So I'm just going to continue along for 1 or 2 more turns. When you have finished and filled as much of this as you desire, so I would continue to use all of that, you just need to make sure that that's nice and tight, and then you trim away the excess. So what I might do is just trim that away now to make it easier to show you how to do that. So imagine we've woven at least 1.5 inches, as much as you've got with the wire that you have available. Let's get that out of the way. Trim the end away and then just smooth that end so that it sits down nice and neatly. So if I flip this back over so that we're looking at the front of the design, you've got this tail of wire that is now waiting to do something, and the thing it is waiting to do is to add your focal bead. So let's pop the focal bead on that tail of wire. I'm going to pull that down into position. So you can see the reason we only had a couple of turns rather than 3 turns of wire down at the bottom is because you can now smuggle this wire in between those 2 little turns. So I'm going to pull that through to begin with. The wire has come from over the top, through the bead, over the top, and between those 2 base beads, which on this design is one of these and one of these. It just goes over the top and through. So if I just show you that on the back now, all we're going to do is wrap that twice around the frame wire. Now it's easy to do, but tricky to show because there's lots going on at this time. So if I just try and hold this sideways, get some warmth into that tail of wire. It's not going to come through because you've woven it up at the top. I didn't do a terribly neat job of that, unfortunately, but never mind. What we're going to do is get that nice and warm, and then we're going to take that tail. It's come over the front of the design, through and around that frame wire. So I'm going to pull that really firmly into position, and you can utilise your pliers to help you with this. Now you need that to turn around at least twice. If you can hide it neatly, preferably a 3rd time. So I'm just going to post the end down in between the focal bead and the frame wire. Push that all the way through. When it comes through the other side, we're just going to grab that, make sure that that's neat and tidy, and then bring the tail across the back of the design. And we're going to trim that very close to that frame wire, like so. So I'm looking twice before I cut, making sure that my ends go in a safe place. And then what I'm going to do is very carefully push that tail of wire neatly so that the very end section sits in between the frame and the bead, and in that way it shouldn't be able to hurt you, harm you, catch on anything or come undone. So if I now flip the design back over onto its face, you can see that we have done our frame, we have added our central focal bead. Danielle's just joined. Something beautiful coming along here. That's so kind of you. Thank you very much. You'll be able to, if anybody has joined late today, you will be able to watch this on replay after the video has finished. It will also go onto YouTube and onto the blog at some point in the near future. Can take a couple of days. So what we've got at the top now, if you remember, we said that we would Continue weaving until we've got between 1 inch and 1.5 inches. We're looking at the front of the design. So what we're going to do, if we've woven all the way up to here, we're going to create a bend just around here, just a couple of weaves up from the base. I'm going to use my flat facing pliers, if I show you that slightly sideways, to create a forwards bend. Show you that sideways, remembering that we wove all the way up here until we ran out of wire. So what I need to do now is try not to hit the camera with the excess wire. I need to make these as centralised as I possibly can. Now the ideal is to have them sitting like railway tracks or like tram lines all the way along. So a little bit of warmth goes a long way. Draw those side by side. So again, if you remember, we decided that we were going to weave up to around about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. What that does for us is it gives the front aspect a woven bail. Sue, I'm so happy that you're adding La Luna to your shopping cart. It is an absolute beaut. You don't have to weave too far. So what you'll notice on my piece here is that the rear of the bail is just naked wire. That means that you're saving your wire for other projects. Just joined, says Kim. Wow, thank you. Much appreciated. Good to have your company. You can catch the beginning of the tutorial right back at the beginning of the video when it's on replay. So if you imagine, as I say, we've done all this weaving up here. So the next thing that we're going to do is to start rolling around with any round form. This is my trusty marker pen. You could use a pencil, any round form that you like, bearing in mind it needs to be not so small that you can't get your chain or ribbon or whatever you want to wear your piece onto it. So what I would do is I would roll this section of weaving around and bring the naked sections of wire underneath. So if I do the manoeuvre, push that through, you can see that I've created a round form. My front section is woven, as we said earlier on we were going to save time. And that what I'm going to do is push this down flat onto the board and bring both of those tail wires so that they sit next to that central part of the bail. Now this is a design of bail that I came up with a few years ago, and I called it the Loki Bail. If you are as much of a fan of Marvel as I am, then you'll kind of understand the reference. It just reminds me of Loki's horns on his helmet. So this is the Loki Bail, and what we have is a woven section in the middle, followed by plain wire. Now you can go 1 time or 2 times with the plain wire, it doesn't really matter. What I would say is if you're using a soft wire, keep it to a minimum number of turns around your round form. If you're using a hard wire, my silver wire today is a fairly hard wire, then you can go another turn around the round form. So if I bring those all the way over the top, try and keep the tension when you're bringing those tails of wire so that the wire sits where you want it to end up. If you splay the wire out as you're bringing them round, they will never sit quite nicely. What we're creating here is quite a springy form. So once you've created your springy Loki Bail, we need to add coils onto those ends. So I'm just going to give those a nice smooth through to make them nice and warm. And when I've decided I've come to the end of my springy section, I need to trim that wire away. So what I'm going to do is leave about 1.5 inches before using my flush cutters and making sure that they are exactly the same length, because that means you're likely to end up with coils of a similar size. Now you remember we started with 18 inches of wire. This is all we're left up with. Now these will be quite useful anyway, so they're going in my scrap pot. I will find uses for those at some point, maybe by making little S-clasp connectors or something like that. It's quite nice to be thrifty. The next tool that we're going to use are round nose pliers. So I'm really happy with how my springy Loki Bail is looking. So I can take my round form out and you can see that that's a large size, and you'll be able to get pretty much any threading material through there, ribbon or whatever you fancy. What we need to do now is to add those coils on. So I'm going to use the end of my round nose pliers at the very end of that section of wire, and I'm going to start rotating that outwards away from that central gap. Small movements, opening and closing the plier, until I get the first part of that coil going. Just put my hand underneath, that might bring it into a sharper focus. Once I've got the start of that coil going, I'm going to roll and roll carefully. Now, if you're concerned about your round shape on the bail there, you can always put this back on the round form whilst you're forming that Loki coiled bail. So it's small movements with my flat pliers. Any flat pliers will do. These are my bent chain nose pliers. And I'm just going to bring that coil so that it sits centrally over the surface of that Loki Bail. Once I remove the round form, you can see you just need to repeat in the opposite direction on the other side. You would have been better to complete more weaving. And then you've obviously got the second half of those beads to add around the outside. So let's wake up my mouse. My mouse has gone to sleep. Hello, I'm still here. I hope that you have enjoyed La Luna. I know that I particularly have. Should put it on that side, I suppose, really. There we go. So those central twisted step facet beads are absolutely beautiful. It's almost like a London blue, but slightly extra because there's an element of almost like a rainbow or a titanium coating to it. Like I say, I don't make the beads, so I don't know exactly what goes into them. I can't tell you what materials they are, but what I can tell you is that you get an absolute ton in a box. It's rammed. And there's so much inspiration in a bead mix like this. This is using 12 small beads and 1 focal bead. That's all I've used from La Luna. So you can think how many times and how many things you can create from one bead box. I hope you've had a lovely time with us here on Jessie James Beads Facebook page. I'm Jem, and I hope to be back again with you very, very soon. Have yourself a beautiful rest of your day. Leah says, you always help me feel like I can do it. I feel very confident. If you break it down into steps, you absolutely can. Deanne says, hope Joey is doing well. Thank you so much. My doggo is in recovery. He had a surgery yesterday, so we're all crossing our fingers to make sure that he's okay. Thank you for your thoughts. Beautiful and nice clear instructions. Thank you, says Trudy. Beautiful, easy to follow tutorial. Thank you, says Lucy. And Sue says thank you also. I appreciate you being here with me. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know that I have. So many messages. Thank you all so very, very much for coming today. I look forward to coming back with you very, very soon. Mwah. Lots of love to you all, and we will catch up with you very, very soon. I'll pop onto the messages on Facebook right now. If there are any questions, do ask, and I'll try to answer them as much as I can. Just drop me a tag. Take care. See you soon. Bye.